Farmers take firefight to home turf. This story says desperate farmers are doing their own backburning to protect their land from bushfires, prompting the Shooters, Fishers and Farmers Party to draft laws to allow property holders to do controlled burns in national parks. The Shooters MLC Robert Borsak will introduce a bill to the New South Wales Parliament next week to give farmers the power to conduct small controlled burns if their property adjoins public lands. News of the move came as the New South Wales Rural Fire Service, known by the acronym the RFS, issued 4 emergency warning alerts this afternoon, including one for the fast-spreading fire in Gospers Mountain region in the north of the Hawkesbury River. Several houses under threat, at least one house destroyed. Now, Mike, tonight on Talkback Radio, we were talking about hazard reduction burns. We've talked about it all week, and I'm on the air with John Stanley, and he said, well, the RFS had said that one of these big fires in one of the national parks had a burn 5 years ago. Now, when you stop and think, if you didn't clean up anything in your backyard or your front yard for 5 years, and you had eucalypt trees which constantly drop leaves, unlike deciduous trees which do it over a period of several weeks or maybe a month in winter, eucalypts constantly drop their leaves. They're very, very oily. Imagine if you never cut back the grass. The idea that there hasn't been hazard reduction is just extraordinary, and you can't blame the Shooters and Fishers for advocating what these farmers want, can you?
Of course not. It comes down to a complete lack of management. That's what it is. We have to manage the environment. I know the Greens are being accused of the green tail wagging the big party dogs, and I think there's some truth in that. I know I was in Canberra with those big fires back then, and a lot of it had to do with all the fuel on the forest fire. And this idea that somehow or other, if we don't interfere, everything will turn out just tickety-boo. In fact, a few years ago I saw a story where a professor in the Northern Territory said, you know, we thought that if we just stayed out of the national parks, nature would regulate itself. Well, guess what? It doesn't. We have to do it.
Yeah. Look, you've had tremendous fires in Queensland, Daniel, and we've talked about Indigenous traditions, and a lot of farmers up and down the east coast and right across Australia go a long way back. The old timers were often taught by Aboriginal people who showed them how to burn off in cooler weather. I'm from a farming family. All the old timers, we always burned off every single season. Now we're seeing loss of life, loss of property, and terrible loss of koalas. One koala population sort of halved. Backburning and hazard reduction isn't the only answer, but it's pretty obvious, isn't it?
It's absolutely essential. It's been quite extraordinary. I mean, in Queensland, again, I don't really want to be too political, but I will say this: there's been some quite head-scratching laws, particularly around land clearing, about what farmers can do on their land. But we have to kind of put this in context. You're quite right about the Aboriginal experience and that deep connection to the land, and that understanding the land has actually played, has been an unsung part of really Australia's land management expertise, because the simple fact is that this is a place which just goes through such sporadic periods of flood and drought, I should say. So to come back to the core point that if you don't do backburning, you're simply putting more fuel on the ground, and if you put more fuel on the ground, you see what we're having at the moment. We're in the midst of crippling drought, and that land management plan, particularly around urban areas, to not have it in place is almost, it seems, reckless on the most generous appraisal, and quite craven on the worst.